All right. Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining. This is Amin Shawki with InfoTrust. I'm the regional managing director here in the MENA region, and today we have a very special guest, analytics guru and senior data advocate Simo Ahava. Thank you so much, Simo, for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's really great. I mean, we at InfoTrust are huge fans of you and your work. But I guess just to jump to the questions, when you meet someone that isn't a super data nerd like us at InfoTrust or anyone that's in the Google Analytics, I guess, community, how do you introduce yourself and what you do?
That's a really toughie. It kind of depends on what kind of a vibe I'm getting from the other one. I don't want to bore people with my job titles or anything like that. I usually either say I'm a data geek or I say I'm a developer. Either works fine. Both require more explanation afterwards, but both are kind of in the ballpark of what I'm doing on my daily, like day-to-day life.
Gotcha. Very cool. Yeah, I think that can resonate with a lot of people that are going to be viewing this or that we're going to be sharing this on with. So, when we were talking before the actual interview here about some of the things you're doing, you mentioned your theme of this year is organization. Can you speak a little bit more to this and what this is?
Yeah. For the past year, I've been working at a Finnish company called Reactor. And Reactor is kind of a special company in the IT field in that we not only deliver like solutions, but we also deliver organizational transformation. So when somebody wants to ask us to help with something, we're always looking for how can we make that company organization a better place so that they can do this stuff on their own later on. Kind of an idealistic consultation approach. And that really resonated in doing all my life that I've been a consultant. In that when you hire a consultant, they usually them as an extra pair of hands to delegate to them some function of your organization which doesn't currently have resources in-house or which you don't feel is in your field of business or something. And I've never really understood that when it comes to marketing or analytics. I mean, how can you delegate something that's in the heart of your business, the very core of your business, to a company that maybe sends you a monthly report or something absurd like that? So what I've been talking so far this year, and what I will be continuing for the rest of the year, is talking about how to kind of stop treating analytics as a project, stop treating it as something you buy off the shelf, and instead start thinking about how to devote the resources necessary to make it a really kind of holistic process in an organization. And this sounds a lot like buzzwordy and gobbledygook, but I really believe in it. I've seen concrete examples every day when companies that are mature enough to actually take analytics as part of their everyday life. I mean, it's not something that just happens automatically, basically. It's something when you enter the office, you see a big screen with your numbers. It's not something that happens once a month when you get a report or something. So I've been really passionate about that. It resonates well with the kind of marketing and analytics audiences because everybody has in their mind a picture of the kind of consultant who really does very little help, just kind of pushes these monthly reports, sells this kind of snake oil stuff like keyword rankings and stuff, without actually taking the time to become intimate with my business, me as the person who requires help. If I hire a consultant, I want them to love my business as much as I love it. That's the only way for the relationship to work. So that's the whole thing in a nutshell. But it kind of branches off to agile analytics, agile methodologies, hybrid skills, all this kind of stuff that I think a modern organization really needs.
Sure. So one follow-up question to that, I guess, do you feel analytics needs to span beyond just the marketing team and the development team, but also touch on client services or leadership? I guess it's more of an entire organizational shift. Is that how you approach projects?
Yeah, absolutely, because data itself isn't confined to a silo, right? Everything produces data all the time, so it would be weird if the only people interested about data in the company are a couple of BI consultants, and then a controller somewhere elsewhere, and then your marketing people. So the idea behind agility, for example, is that you have these multidisciplinary teams So there's no longer like IT that is cornered up somewhere. There's no marketing cornered up somewhere. But we have teams that are built of all these disciplines. And the one thing that kind of unites them, the icebreaker, if you will, is data. So that's what we start our discussions with, and that's what we end our discussions with. It's very idealistic. It requires a lot of hard work. Many companies still, understandably, fall back to the waterfall model, which kind of uses these silos to enforce structure. And they believe that that's the only way to stay in budget or something other. And it's easy. The waterfall is easy because you can wash your hands of what the previous guy did, because now it's your turn, then you can push it forward and again wash your hands. But the problem is that that's not how the human organism works. There are no discrete stages. Everything is kind of flowing and in flux all the time. So if you confine analytics to just one part of the organization, then nobody else in the organization has to take responsibility. They can all be like, yeah, that's the data guy's thing. I don't have to worry about that. And that, I think, is the start of the end if you want to be data-driven. It really requires that everybody be fascinated. I mean, at least fascinated about data. Passionate is great, but at least you have to be curious about data information.
I see. Do you think that would be the most common challenge facing organizations, is the adoption of data with everyone's role, or is it maybe something, another bigger challenge for analytics adoption and deployment?
I think it's one of the challenges. It's not a difficult one to solve. I mean, it's step by step. The way we do it is, if we find an organization that is resilient to this type of things, you can't really make them do anything. It's not like we have the power to enforce their hand. But what we can do is create a kind of inspiration. So put up screens everywhere so that people can see data wherever they look. Just make it kind of a omnipresence in the company. We have all our daily meetings and stand-up meetings in the middle of the kind of open office so that people can see the kind of hubbub and the discussion and the back and forth that's going on all the time. And they can hear the terminology when they hear us talk. Some people hate the fact that we make so much noise, but I prefer the inspiration aspect of it. So I think that's a big thing. But I'm not like black and white enough to say that everybody should be doing this. I think it's a maturing thing. Like you have to understand the benefits to put your money into it. But I've yet to see a case where a passionate organization focused on growing and expanding and decided not to use data. And I've yet to see a case where they've actually transitioned after being introduced to what data can do. So you rarely go back from analytics or a data-driven organization once you've done it right.
Sure. A buzzword that comes to mind, I guess, when you're talking about this is data democratization, I think is the term. So do you think, another follow-up question, tools and technologies are designed for data democratization? Because there's so many different analytics platforms and tools out there that sometimes you need a data scientist to make sense of. Do you think there's other tools that are designed for more of that holistic approach?
Yeah, I think the tools have got it a bit backwards. I think they're enforcing the idea of especially the tools that I work with, Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager, for example. I think at least in some ways they enforce the stereotype of the non-developer marketer. So that their marketing jargon is focused on it's just one click away, intuitive UI, you don't have to bother with IT anymore. I think they enforce these stereotypes, and the bulk of my consultation work is to break down these stereotypes and show how these tools can be just as well used and should be used by developers, by business owners. There's all these different levels to these tools. And on the other hand, you have these huge, complex setups in BI world, for example, with cubes and data warehouses and ETLs and ClickView and all this kind of specialist tools and platforms that cost a whole lot of money. And they're probably at the other end of the spectrum where you actually do need a specialist to work with the data. And I think that's perfectly fine. But these kind of journeyman tools like Google Tag Manager, I think the message has been a bit awkward in that it's solely focusing on this marketing aspect and this marketer's tools when it can really be a powerful tool in the hands of an empowered developer. And in my presentation, I have this one slide which I think always makes people frown, is that it basically says that a tag management solution empowers developers above all else. And considering what the marketing message is, that it actually empowers marketers, I've always thought it in the way that if you have a developer who already has the web development under, at par, and then you teach him the marketing business and make him passionate about the product market fit and the agile process, this person's a superstar. I mean, he's got superpowers. He's got everything. The developer side is the part that usually becomes the stumbling block, because it requires practice, it requires discipline, it requires technical know-how. I'm not saying marketing is a one part either, but to be a developer, you need a certain kind of technical approach, and there's a good way to write code and a bad way to write code, and you want to be in the former camp. So it's, in a way, I think that these platforms have been focusing on the wrong groups all the time. I don't think they should focus on any one single group, but of course they have to do so to grow and to expand. But personally, I try to change the message to direct it towards developers first and foremost.
Okay, so I guess to follow up on that, because you mentioned tag management and you write some awesome content on analytics and tag management, how you can accelerate your data collection process. So for organizations starting with tag management, would you recommend they start with the development team, getting them on board with the concept of tag management, or is there maybe a different approach to getting onto that bandwagon, if you will?
Every single time, on board the developers first, on board IT first, because whatever you do with the tool, it's still attached to one of your most important commodities, which is your website. And the tool is destructive. You can do all sorts of horrible stuff with it. You can break the entire UX of the website, and we've seen these examples day and day again. So governance and ownership has to be in IT, at least until somebody steps forth who understands the process of the IT and the IT process. And this is just so incredibly important, which requires that the IT and the developers understand what the tool is for. And if the pitch is that, hey, we're buying this tool because we want marketers to work behind your backs, I'm not sure it goes down well, in the dungeon where the developers work. So, and it all boils down to this kind of a communication paradigm. We're talking about, it's I don't know if you're familiar, but there's a thing called Conway's Law, where applications and solutions and infrastructure that you develop or implement in an organization, it mirrors the communication structures of the company. So if you have an let's call, say, marketing, that are unable to communicate with each other, then any solutions they use will be very difficult to communicate with each other either. So the point of a tag management solution is to lubricate these relationships, is to create a common tool and platform which has a developer aspect, a very, very powerful and strong and robust developer side to it, but it also has all these benefits for the marketer as well, and for the business owner, and for the advertiser, and so on. But the heart, because it's a technical solution that's tacked onto a website or a digital app, it has to reside in IT. It has to be owned or governed by somebody who understands the repercussions of what can happen, and most often what will happen. I think that's really important.
It's a very good point, and you mentioned governance, I guess. With some organizations we're working with, they're starting to build these governance teams to enforce policies around tag management and tag deployment. Do you foresee the governance aspect of tag management needing to live within development, or maybe a separate team that's almost in between marketing and development to take in both requirements? From a governance standpoint, what would you think? I mean, have you worked with organizations that have governance teams and processes?
Yeah, I think there's no empirical evidence to back this up. This is purely based on what kind of consultation work we do. Governance is completely required, but how you do it, the process you do it, is it a team, is it a documentation? It very much depends. What I think is important is that teams working on a solution, for example, us as software developers, we've been given a mandate and we've been given boundaries that we're not to cross. And what we need to do is we need to have free hands to do what we like. And reach the conclusion and the target and the objectives the best we can. But we have to also know where the boundaries are, and that's where governance steps in. So,
shifting gears slightly, because you're talking, or we're discussing a lot about developers and marketers and how they work together, but based on your bio, you actually started in web development, but then became interested in marketing, IT disciplines, and web analytics. So more just a personal question, what about marketing analytics specifically drew your interest? And maybe how can we, as the marketers or consultants, take that and try and inspire developers we're working with as well?
Well, actually, to be honest, I started in English linguistics research. I was a researcher at the University of Helsinki working on an obscure dialect of English spoken in the 1970s in a rural county. But anyway, then I moved to web development when the call of the capitalist really lured me over. So I've been doing web development since as long as I could hold a mouse. I think what pulled me over to marketing was that I wanted the web development stuff to have a meaning. I wanted it to relate to something. I didn't want to just code HTML. I actually wanted to see what kind of an impact it has on audiences. So I joined a really nice marketing organization called NetBooster and did a lot of work with them around SEO, drifting towards analytics all the time because that was my forte. And then now I'm back in IT, of course. But so I think because I think this was both ways. Why developers should be interested in marketing paradigm is because we're always talking about when we're doing software development, we're talking about the product market fit. Like that's the most important thing. It's you have to have a product that fits the market you're designed it for. And unless you understand the ladder, if you only understand the product, it's not going to take you far. You also have to understand the ladder, what the market is like. And the product market fit is something that we talk about all the time ad nauseum. It's the most important thing we have in our palette. So if you wanted to do good software development, it just makes sense to understand the paradigm of what your people are looking for. Whether you want to go to specifics like SEO or PPC or social media advertising, that doesn't matter. You just have to understand what makes a person click, what makes your potential buyer take your product compared to your competitors. And as for the other way around, and this I think I'm also good on the slides, is that if you work in digital, like in anything to do with digital, and you don't understand the basics of, for example, how a web browser works, or what happens when a user is on a web page, or why is the web sometimes slow, I think you've got the wrong profession for yourself. Because it's just to give an example, when I worked in SEO and I was doing a lot of audits, and I was doing technical SEO, of course, and I was doing a lot of auditing, and I was looking at the reports my clients' previous consultation partners had sent them. And they had these rules of thumb in technical SEO, like all redirects should be 301 redirects, not 302, and all this kind of weird stuff. And I was looking at these reports and just all the time thinking, this consultant is asking the client's IT to do a very dramatic change in their server-side processes. Do they know what they are actually requesting the client to do? And I always thought that no, they don't. They've just learned to request this thing because it's a given in the SEO world that you have to have this kind of process in the server. And that really scared me. That really scared me that how much damage can be done by just an innocuous report that's being ordered by a client. And that really has changed my gears in everything I do in workshops and presentations. And in my blog as well, I try to speak of things as clearly as possible. It's the concepts are quite complex sometimes. I know I don't do a good job always, but I do my best. But the point is to not obfuscate things, to not talk to marketers as if they're babies and say that, there's this magic that happens behind the computer screen when you press a key on the keyboard, but actually tell them what happened and what the implications are. I'm not saying that majority of marketers are like this, but I've seen enough examples to be worried about it. So I think, in a way, I'm very biased here because I work in development, but I think it's a question of, I think marketing needs to take it up a notch and start talking about technical concepts and be really passionate about the technical side of things as well, because it's not quite enough to just kind of repeat these kinds of dogma that's been around the scene for years, unless you really understand what you're doing. So it's just a wake-up call to everyone. If you say something, you better believe and understand what you're talking about, regardless of where you're working.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one thing you definitely do exceptionally well. That's why we're big fans here at InfoTrust. As far as your blog, it's simple enough, but it's not so overly simplified that it doesn't explain how things work. But it's very helpful. I mean, it's technical, but it's still helpful for the marketers to understand a little bit more how things work. But speaking of your blog, another question is, you mentioned on your blog, you have a singular purpose, which is to tell complicated stories in a simple, understandable, and actionable way. So what would you recommend for those data nerds out there to present stories in the same way? Like, what are some tips or tricks just to keep in mind as they need to present some of these stories?
As much as possible, try to communicate face-to-face. The problem with the blog is that I never know who's reading. So I have to I've created, this sounds very kind of insane, but I've created a kind of persona to whom I'm writing. And I don't think that's ever changed. I think it's the same person all the time. It's a person who has the basic knowledge and understanding of how to do these things, but really wants to be overwhelmed. So that's why the rhetoric I have in my blog posts is kind of loose and offhand, and kind of I try to be comical, which usually backfires. But I try to be very casual and colloquial in the rhetoric. But the concepts are I don't try to make them anything else than they are. They are sometimes very complex. So the persona I'm thinking about is somebody who understands what I'm saying, but might need to do a little extra research to do it, to really get it. And I don't know if that works. I know it alienates some people, but I think it's better to alienate people on the basis that they didn't understand than to alienate them because it was too easy. Because if they didn't understand, they can come back later once they have understood the topic. And for anybody wanting to make an impact, and when I'm presenting at conferences, what's really important for me is to just look at what people are, how their eyes are moving, what they're doing. Because I can quickly see if it's going over their heads, and then I can switch gears a little. So it comes with experience, I guess, but it's also, I guess, a question of empathy. It's very easy to lock yourself into a little world where you think everybody knows as much as you do, or everybody's interested and passionate about the same things you do. And the most difficult thing for anybody presenting about anything is to step out of that box and really look at what other people might be doing and what they might be feeling. It's interesting you said, just sidetracking, it's interesting you said about telling data stories. That's one of the things I try to avoid more than anything, is to turn data into a story, and instead I just throw the data out there and let people create the stories. I think that's there's a certain amount of subjectivity when it comes to analysis, and the numbers we look at can have completely different interpretations depending on what mindset is that's looking at them. And again, going to the marketing world a little, there's a tendency to do these little tricks where you write a beautiful sentence and embed the numbers within. But when you're writing that sentence and using adjectives like a huge increase or amazing sales, you're actually embedding your own interpretation into the text. And when somebody reads that, it's very difficult to not be influenced by the analyst's interpretation. So I think it's fine to have those stories, but I think they should be open to interpretation. So when you present the data, you should actually present it as the start of a discussion rather than the end of one. So when you're presenting data, it's not like this is the be-all, end-all, fact of all things. I'm now telling you how it is. Instead, it should be like, this is my interpretation, and maybe we can look at it from another perspective to see if something else happens. That was just picking up on something you said earlier.
No, that's great. I mean, that's the one challenge, I guess, that we've experienced. I just want to build on that a little bit, is when we're working with organizations, we also try and come in kind of impartial, just looking at the data as the data and letting the discussions evolve. A lot of other organizations working with other partners that might also be running the media or running campaigns, it's difficult to detach, I guess, and just look at the data, but then also manage the campaign. So that's certainly very good advice, I think, from...
That makes perfect sense. I think the key here is I think there's a correlation between how subjective you can be and how well you understand the business of your client. So unless you understand it intimately, I don't think you're entitled to make interpretations that resonate with their business. So the more you become intimated with how they work, what their objectives are, the more you can add kind of interpretation to the data, because it's more likely that you're thinking along the same lines as they are. But if you're like a off-the-shelf analytics project where you send monthly GA reports, copy-pasted from PDF or screenshot it from GA UI, I wouldn't go so far as to tell the client what you think that data means. I would just present the data and let them make the interpretations. That's just kind of the kind of climb or the correlation that I'm working with. But it might work differently for others, of course.
I think that's a really good bringing it all together based on the first question, or the first thing that we talked about as far as getting full understanding of the entire team, looking at analytics from a strategy standpoint almost, versus just a project, getting multiple teams involved. So I think that's a really good kind of wrap up, if you will.
Wow.
Yeah. So one last question, if I can ask just one last question, because I noticed this also, that you are a Google expert developer. So what kind of perks do you get being a Google expert developer for Google Analytics?
I'm trying to think of if I get any perks. Well, we get a cool badge, and we get to say that we're part of a very exclusive group. I mean, of course, there are some things. We do have an inside track to what's going on the platform. So my company is also GACP, so I already have a certain kind of inside track, which is, any company working with Google Analytics on a professional scale should take a look at being a Google Analytics certified partner. So being a developer expert, we have quarterly meetings with GA and GTM developer teams. So we get to know what's coming up. We have lots of NDAs, of course, in place. I like to think that we have a direct channel to the developers, so we can talk to them also if we have questions, but that's a relationship I think I've cultivated over the years anyway, so it just enforces that perk. Well, there is a all expenses paid trip to Mountain View once a year for the GA Summit, which is nice. But I think it's more about the recognition you get for being very nice to be nominated by a Googler and then to get the appointment. It hasn't really changed what I do. It just means that I have like official approval of what I'm doing. And the good thing about it is that because I'm not a Google employee, I can still bash them. I can still criticize them openly, which I do. I don't think Google makes the best, or they make really good platforms, but I don't think they're the best in the world. I think we have yet to decide who makes the best platforms, the best tools. And there's a lot of shortcomings to them. And I try to be as honest as possible about them, because I don't think Google itself is honest enough about their own platforms. Why would they be? Why would you? What kind of product strategy is it to kind of nullify your own achievements? Sure. So I think we are a necessary part of the equation in evangelizing, if I can use a horrible word, Google's platforms to developers specifically, but I am branching out towards the marketing audiences as well, because I've worked in marketing and I kind of know what they're looking for as well.
Right. Well, it's definitely a recognition, well-deserved, I think, for you, being a Google expert developer. Also, I forgot to mention, congratulations on your recent nomination, I feel, for Digital Analytics Association, for one of the awards there as well.
Yeah, it was. Last year I was a finalist in 2 categories. This year 1, and I'm not going to win it. I'm going against Chris Decided from Google again, so she's going to sweep the board as usual. So, but it's always fun to be. It's so cool to be nominated by your peers. I mean, there's nothing that compares to that. So I try to be humble enough to really I'm baffled why this happens, because I don't really do the kind of outreach that or the kind of brand management that most of the other nominees who do an excellent job as well. I just like blog posts, so it's always fun to get the recognition, and it's not what I'm looking for. I mean, I would like this blog if nobody even read it. It's a very important outlet for myself, and I use it daily myself. I look at, hey, have I thought about this before? Yeah, I have thought about this before, and I implement it. So it's a resource for myself as well and my colleagues. But it's an amazing recognition. I'm really, really humbled by it.
Right. Great. Well, I don't want to hold you up anymore of your time, but thank you so much for joining us. This was extremely insightful, and I know it's going to be very valuable for the people viewing. And thank you also for, certainly us at InfoTrust will continue reading and using it as much as we need to. So appreciate the time. Thanks so much, Simo.
Thanks, Amin. It was great being here.